B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Rosh Hashanah Daf Tezvav. We're going to start 11 lines from the top of the Amud. Says the Gemara, Boi minei Rabbi Yochanan mi Rabbi Yanai. We're in the middle of learning about the halachas of shlita and meiser as they apply to the esrogim. And Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yanai, Esrog Rosh Hashanah sheloi eimosai. When is the beginning of the year for the esrog? Is it in Shvat, as with other Peres or Elon, or do we say no? It's like Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishri, like other vegetables. And we saw before in Daf Yudalid that the esrog is similar and compared to vegetables, according to some opinions, in some of the halachas. Omar Lei, so Rabbi Yanai answered back to Rabbi Yochanan, Shvat, that the Rosh Hashanah for the esrog is like the other fruits, and that is in the month of Shvat. Asks the Gemara, Shvat de Chadoshim or Shvat de Tkufa? Is it the Shvat in the lunar months, as we know the month of Shvat, or is it 30 days after the solar season of Teves? 30 days after that is when the Shvat, as in the seasons of the solar year, that's when they start. So which Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah for these esrogim? Omerli de Chadoshim. Rabbi Yanai told Rabbi Yochanan, it's the regular lunar months of Shvat as we know them. Boi minei Rava mirav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman, v'omri lo Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yanai. Some say again it was Rabbi Yochanan who asked Rabbi Yanai that hoisa shana mu'uberes mai, when it's a leap year, and we know in a leap year there is a second Adar. So what month is considered the Shvat, which is the Rosh Hashanah for the esrogim? Is it always the month after Teves, which is the regular month of Shvat, or is it the month before the month where Purim is? In which case it would be the Adar Rishon, the first of the two Adars. You just follow what happens in most years. In most years there's no leap year, and the month of Shvat is what's the month of Shvat. So too in a leap year, the month that's called Shvat is the month which is the Rosh Hashanah for the esrogim. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rabbi. We're going to see here a machlokes between Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna. Omar Rabbi, esrog bas shishis. An esrog that the chanota, it first appeared in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, of the Trumas cycle, Trumas and Maaseh cycle in the 6th year. Shenichnas al shvius. It's only the esrog became ripened and ready to be picked. It was only picked in the 7th year. Do we say that this is an esrog of shishis? And the ramifications would be that in the 6th year there's chiyuv of maestras, Meiser Rishon and Meiser Oni. In the year of Shemitah, there's no Shemitah, there's no maestras at all. And also, if it's a Shemitah fruit, then there's halachas of biur, which means that when this particular fruit cannot be found anymore in the fields, in the orchards, one has to do a halacha called biur. One has to remove it from the home. One has to destroy it. There's many halachas of biur which we're not going to discuss here in detail. But Rabbi said that such an esrog, that the chanota was in shishis in the 6th year, but the lekita was in the 7th year, is potter from meiser. That sounds like we're looking at this esrog as a shmita esrog. Uptura min habiur. However, it's potter from biur. It seems it's not a shmita mais. It's not a shmita esrog. If it was a shmita esrog, it would be chayev in biur. So we have a type of a contradiction here. That on the one hand it's potter from meiser, in the other hand it's potter from biur. We're going to have to understand that. But in another case, says Rabbi, if it was an esrog that the chanota was in the 7th year, and it became ripe and picked in the 8th year, and in the shminis, which is the first year of the next cycle, there's Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. And there's all the halachas of Trumas and Maaseh apply. In Shemitah, not. So it's P'tura min Meiser, it's potter from Meiser. It seems that it's saying that it's got the status of a Shemitah fruit, and that's why it's potter from Meiser. V'chayeves b'biur. And it's chayev to do biur, which means that this second halacha of Rabbah, of Shvius going into Shminis, it seems over there we give it all the chumras of Shemitah. Not the chumras of Shemitah, sorry, we give it all the halachas of Shemitah. And in the Okay, we'll discuss soon how this works. Omar le Abaye. Abaye asked Rabbi as follows: Bishlei Maseifa, in your second halacha, when it was an esrog that the chanota was in the 7th year and the lekita was in the 8th year, then I can understand that the chumrah, you're going l'chumrah. You're saying that since it's the chanota was in shvius, therefore, since shvius is a chiyuv min haTorah, there's a chiyuv min haTorah to keep the shmita, and hence there's a chiyuv to be mafkir, that the fields and the esrogim, they are rendered ownerless, and once they're ownerless, there's no chiyuv meiser. There's no chiyuv meiser on something which is rendered ownerless, which means that it could be that you had a suffix. It could be that Rabbi had a doubt. Do we go follow the chanota or do we follow the lekita? What do we follow here? So it could be that he was machmir, and he says l'chumra will follow that you have to keep it as shmita. And since you have to be mafkir it, then even though if it's shmita, then if it would be shmita, indeed it's potter from meiser. But since it's only lechumra, that means it's a suffix whether it's considered shvius or considered shminis. Why is it not chayiv b'meiser? Because if it's shminis, it's chayiv meiser. We say no. Since min haTorah, you've got a chiyuv because of suffix deraisa lechumra to practice shmita, and in shmita you have to do hefker. Once it's hefker, even if it's not anything to do with shmita, even if it's an 8th year esrog that you happen to make hefker, you happen to make ownerless, you also potter from meiser. There's a halacha that meiser doesn't apply to hefker. So that say for the halacha, we can understand that it should be potter from meiser and chayev biur. Let's go back to the Reisha. In the Reisha, the fact that it's potter from meiser, again, would seem to be telling us that since in the first case it's shishis going into shvius, it's a suffix whether we follow the chanota shishis or lekita, which is shvius. So we're machmir for shmita, it has to become hefker, and if it's hefker, it's potter from meiser. So all that is okay, but then we're going to have a problem with that one detail. Why is there no chiyuv biur if it's shishis going into shvius? What happened to the chiyuv biur? If you have to be machmir for shvius min haTorah, you should be chayiv to do the biur, like we saw in the Sefer. And that's what Abai is asking Rabbi. Bishlei Maseifa l'chumra. We can understand your whole Sefer, the second part of what you said, and assume that you had a suffix and you're being machmir. Elo Reisha, but in the Reisha, then I can understand why you're potter from meiser because of a chumrah that you're keeping shmita. But p'tura min habiur amai, why are you potter from biur? And are you going to say de omrinon zil boso chanota? Are you going to say that is Rabbi going to say that this wasn't a suffix? I hold that regarding the esrogim, you always follow the chanota, which means that in the Sefer, if the chanota was in shvius and the lekita was in shminis, we follow the chanota. This is shmita, not michumra. It's shmita meikar adin, and that's why there's no meiser, because there's no meiser on shvius fruits, and that's why there's a chiyuv biur because it's shmita. Going back to the Reisha, the reason that there's no chiyuv biur because the Reisha is talking about shishis going into shvius. And the shishis going to shvius, the chanota was in shishis, there's no kedushas shvius, there's no chiyuv biur. So that would be fine. But then we would have a question, if so, why are you potter from meiser? If you're following an estrog and saying it's always chanota, then shishis going into shvius, it should be for meiser, the halachas of shishis, not shvius. Then I hoche te chayiv b'meiser, it should be chayiv meiser. Omer le, so Rabbi answered, no, I do go bosar chanota. You've got one question. Why is it that this esrog, which is the chanota was in shishis and the lekita was in shvius, why is it that there's no chiyuv meiser? I'll tell you why. Because we're talking here about that this esrog became ripened during shmita, and it got picked during shmita. So this particular esrog happens not to be kedushas shvius because the chanota was in shishis, but all the fields and all the orchards and everything is hefka, and people are coming in and everybody's touching everything. So I've got no way of guarding this estrog. This estrog, for all intents and purposes, is considered similar to hefker. It's almost ownerless because there's no way that I can use my ownership to protect it at all. Everybody's touching this tree. And you want to say it's chayiv v'meiser? The reason it's potter for meiser is not because it's shvius. this esrog is not shvius. But since everything around it is shmita, it's going to have the same status as hefker, and as we said before, anything hefker is potter from Maisa. So that was the opinion of Rabbi and the way we understand it. Rav Hamnuna Omar. Rav Hamnuna is going to argue with Rabbi in one particular halacha. Only in this last thing that we just mentioned, in the shishis, going into shvius, do we say, Rabbi says he's potter from Meiser, as he just said, because everybody's touching it. Rav Hamnuna is going to say, no, since this is not a shmita esrog, it's not hefka. The Torah made it hefka, Torah didn't make it hefka. The fact that other people are touching it, so they're ganovim. They're stealing. They're causing you damage. But that doesn't mean it's hefker, and there's no reason it shouldn't be chayiv with meiser. Let's see this inside. Rav Hamnuna Omar, bas shishis shenichneses l'shvius. This esrog which the chanota was in shishis and the lekita was in shvius, la'olam shishis. It's got all halachas of shishis. It's potter from biur, because biur is halacha only on shmita fruits, and it's chayiv meiser. Ubas shvius shenichneses l'shminis. If the chanota was in shvius and the lekita in shminis, then La'olam shvius, and Rabbi agreed with this. Rabbi, there's no argument in this aspect that we follow the chanota, and it has all the halachas of shmita. It's potter from meiser and chayev in biur. Continues the Gemara Meisvei. We're going to ask a question from a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Omer mishum Reb Shimon. It was said in the name of Reb Shimon that esrog bas shishis shenichnas al shvius, this esrog of the chanota in the 6th year, the lekita in the 7th year, ptura min meiser. This is like Rabbi said, not like Rav Hamnuna. Uptura min biur, and it's also potter from biur, and this detail Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna agree with. Why? And he explains: She'ein lecha davar shechayev b'meiser. The only time where you can be chayev with meiser, Elohim kein gidel b'chiyuv v'nilkat b'chiyuv. You only be chayev on something which not only when the zman of the chanota, but also the zman of the lekita were both done in a time where you chayev. And over here, where the lekita was done in shmita, there's no chiyuv of meiser. Ubas shvius shenichneses l'shminis, a case where you've got an esrog which was the chanota in the 7th year and went into the 8th year, is ptura min meiser, is potter from meiser. Everybody agreed with this. Umin biur, and it's also potter from biur. Nobody agreed with this. She'ein lecha davar shechayev b'biur, because the only time you can be chayev b'biur is elam ken gidel b'shvius v'nilkat b'shvius. Is a pasuk that the concept of biur only applies in the 7th year. Over here, it will only be chayev biur if the biur, the chanota and the lekita is done in the shmita year. Over here, that the lekita is done in the 8th year, there's no chiyuv biur. So Reisha Kashya Rav Hamnuna. The first part of Rav Shimon's halacha it works with Rabbi, not with Rav Hamnuna. Safer, but the second part regarding the biur is Kashya bein the Rabbi, bein Rav Hamnuna. Both Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna both arguing with Rav Shimon, and Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna are Amoraim. Rav Shimon is a Tana, and we're not comfortable with Amoraim arguing with Tanoim. Says the Gemara, you're right, but there's going to be another Tana that we're about to see, and this other Tana, Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna, are going to hold like this other Tana. Tanoi, indeed it's a machlekes Tanoim, and Reb Shimon holds the way he holds, but there's going to be others who argue. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa Omer Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi says, Avtulmus Heid, Avtulmus testified, and this is the opinion that Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna are going to follow. Mishum Chamishas Kenim, in the name of the 5 elders, Esrog Achar Lekitosai Lemeiser. That regarding the halachas of Meiser, you always follow the lekita when it was picked. V'Rabbi Seinu nimnu be'usha, and the Chachomim in Usha, they voted, they counted between themselves, they discussed this halacha v'omru, and they said, Echod achar lekitosai bein lemeiser bein l'shvius. That regarding both halachas of Meiser and Shvius, you follow the time of the lekita, and not the regarding esrog, and not the chanota. And the Gemara now says, I don't understand. The 5 elders were discussing Meiser, And then the Rabbi Seinu Nimnu Be'usha were responding regarding Meiser and Shvius. They discussed Shvius as well, as if there was a machlokes. Who argues regarding Shvius? Shvius Mandachar Shemei. Who mentioned Shvius? Why are they responding to Shvius when we're discussing Meiser? It says the Gemara, this is what you have to read into the Brisa. Esrog achar lekitosei lemaiser. Regarding the general halachos of Maisa, we follow the lekita. Va'achar chanota leshvius. But the halachos of shvius, they depend on the chanota. Rabbi Seinu nimnu be'usha, and the Rabbi Seinu usha, they said that you follow achar lekitosei bein lemaiser and bein leshvius. So even though Reb Shimon said, as we saw before, that regarding the chiyuv biur, you're only chayav if the lekita and the gedila, which is and the chanota, were all in the shnas hashmita, and we said that that didn't work with Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna, who both said there was a chiyuv biur, even if the chanota was in shvius and the lekita was in shminis. So here we're saying we've got these 5 chachamim who say that regarding the halachas of shvius, we only follow the chanota, not the lekita, and therefore, since the chanota was in the shvius, there is a chiyuv biur. And in the first case of the chanota in the shishis and the shvius, the lekita, over there we can understand there's no chiyuv biur, because in halachas of shvius we follow chanota, not lekita. What's going to be the one machlekes regarding Maisa? That was a local machlekes. If the fact that everybody's touching these trees, that is called a hefker, nothing to do with shvius. Whether it's called hefker, and if it's hefker, there's no chiyuv meiser. According to Rav Hamnuna, he says it's not called hefker, and therefore there's a chiyuv meiser. Rabbi says that it is called hefker, and therefore there's no chiyuv meiser. So in this aspect, which we saw that Reb Shimon and Rabbi and Rav Huna had a different opinion, Rabbi and Rav Huna were following these 5 zakenim. Continues the Gemara. Itmar, Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish Amri Tarvayu. Both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish said that Esrog bas Shishis shenichnas al shvius, and Esrog that the Chanota was in the 6th year and the Lekita was in the 7th year, la'olam Shishis. It has all the halachas of the time of the Chanota. It's got status of Shishis, which is that there's no chiyuv of biur, and there is a chiyuv of meiser, which is what Rav Hamnuna said before. Ki also Ravin Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Esrog bas Shishis shenichnas al shvius, that this Esrog, that the Chanota was in the 6th year and the Lekita was in the 7th year, afile kazayis, even though it was only the size of a kazayis, which is after Chanota, after it's appeared already in the 6th year, V'nas is kikor, and in the 7th year it became a very big esrog. Chayovin oleo mishum tevel. It has all the halachas of the 6th year, and the 6th year trumas and maisrus apply. And until you take trumas and maisrus, it's called tevel. You're not allowed to eat it. Continues the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon. Ilon, a tree shechontu peiros of koidem Tu B'Shvat, that the fruits appeared before Tu B'Shvat. We saw in our Mishnah, according to Beis Hillel, Rosh Hashanah le'ilonos is on Tu B'Shvat. At what stage in the development of the fruits do we decide? Do we look whether it's before or after Tu B'Shvat? The chanota, the appearance. So in ilon shechontu peiros of koidem Tu B'Shvat misasir l'shana she'avar. That means the year switches on Tu B'Shvat. That's the Rosh Hashanah for the ilonos. So any fruits that the chanota was before Tu B'Shvat is from the previous year. Achar Tu B'Shvat, if the chanota was after Tu B'Shvat, misasir l'shana haba, then it belongs to the next year's crops. Omer ibn Nechemya. This is all still in the Brisa. Nechemya said, "Bamed dvarim amurim." What type of tree are we talking about? Be'ilon she'oiseh shtei breichos b'shana. That's only a tree that makes 2 broods, 2 families. An interesting term. The Gemara is going to ask that. But when the fruits become ripened twice in the year, then we say don't follow the lekita, the time of the picking. You follow the chanota. That depends if the chanota was before or after Tu B'Shvat. And now the Gemara asks, interject, shtei breichos sol kadatach. What does breichos come in with birds? When birds they have families at 2 different intervals, we call it shtei breichos. But what does breichos have to do with fruits on a tree? It means similar to 2 breichos, which means that not all the fruits become ripened at the same time. So Rabbi Nechemia is saying that a type of a tree that not all the fruits become ripened at the same time, then the chanota before or after Tu B'Shvat is the deciding factor. Aval ilon ha'isa brecha achas, but a type of tree that all the fruits become ripened at the same time, kagoin dekolim, like date palms, v'zeisim, and olives, v'charuvim and carobs, afal pi shechontu peruseim koidem Tu B'Shvat, even though the chanota was before Tu B'Shvat, mis'asim l'shana haba, the maestros are for the next year, because we follow the lekita, not the chanota. Omer Rabbi Yochanan. So that was the end of the brisa. That the beginning of the brisa says, as we've learned till now, that Peris Ilon is dependent on chanota before or after Tu B'Shvat. Rabbi Nechemia says that certain trees where they all become ripe at once, then it depends on whether the lekita was before or after Tu B'Shvat. Omer Rabbi Yochanan says, Noagu ha'om, it was a custom amongst the people, b'charuvin, by the carobs, which is one of the examples of a tree whose fruits become ripened at the same time. Rabbi Nechemia, they followed Rabbi Nechemia, that it depends when they did the lekita, when they picked the fruits, not when the fruits first appeared at Chanota. That was what Rabbi Yochanan said. Eisvir Shlokish Rabbi Yochanan. The Shlokish now questioned Rabbi Yochanan. You said that the people, they ruled, so it seems from what you, Rabbi Yochanan, who are telling us that the people had, the custom of the people was by the Charuvim, like Rabbi Nechemia, it seems that you, Rabbi Yochanan, are suggesting that the halacha is like Rabbi Nechemia. We're going to ask a question from a Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about benois shuach, which seems to be some white type of figs, and they are also become ripened at the same time. They get picked at the same time. Shvius shelohem. When does shvius apply to them? Only shnia, which means if the time that they get picked is in the year 2 of the next Shemitah cycle, which is the 3rd year, including Shemitah, that means only those benois shuach, that the chanota was in Shemitah and the lekita was 2 years later, then we say that Shemitah applies to them. Because the benois shuach, they only make fruits once in 3 years. So in order for Shemitah to apply to these fruits, it has to be the fruits that get finished and ripened in the year 2 of the next cycle, and that will tell us that the chanota was during Shemitah. The chanota is during Shemitah, then they have the kedushas shvius. Shvius shalem, that's when they have the kedushas shvius. So what do we see from this Mishnah clearly? That this benois shuach, that the lekita is 2 years after Shemitah. Nonetheless, the halachas of Shemitah apply because the chanota is in the year of Shemitah. And this is clearly not like Rabbi Nechemia said. So how can Rabbi Yochanan say that the custom was to follow Rabbi Nechemia? Ishtik, Rabbi Yochanan didn't answer. It seemed that he agreed with the question, and it seemed that he would change his mind and say, you're right. And the halacha is not like Rabbi Nechemia. The halacha is like we see in that Mishnah, that even fruits that they finish at the same time, it's one brecha, nonetheless we follow the chanota, not the lekita. That's what it would seem. However, Rabbi Abba Kohen is not happy with that, because he's got 3 different suggestions of how Rabbi Yochanan could have answered Rish Lakish, and says, I was telling you about a custom of the people out there regarding the Charuvim, and Rabbi Yochanan was actually talking about Meiser. Because what was the Mishnah talking about? The Mishnah the Brisa with Rabbi Nechemia is not even talking about Shemitah, it's talking about Meiser. It says, Ilon shechontu pereis of koidem Tu B'Shvat misaser l'shana she'avra. It's all about Meiser. And the Ilon, and when it says the kolim zeisim v'charuvim afal pi shechontu Rabbi Nechemia, it's all within the topic of Meiser. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? That the people were following Charuvim like Rabbi Nechemia. Rish Lakish asked a question from a Mishnah that was talking about Shemitah and didn't follow Rabbi Nechemia, and Rabbi Yochanan had nothing to answer. Well, there's lots of things he could have answered. Amalei Rabbi Abba Kohen, Rabbi Yossi Kohen, and my ishtik, why did Rabbi Yochanan remain silent? Lei Malei should have answered, Amina lecha anor Rabbi Nechemia. I told you they followed Rabbi Nechemia. Vat omrisli Rabbanon. And you're telling me that there's a Mishnah that follows the Rabbanon? I know there's a Tanakama in the Mishnah, and Rabbi Nechemia made a disclaimer and said, I hold that it's only this type of tree, not that type of tree. It's a Machlekes Chachamim and Rabbi Nechemia. So I'm saying they followed Rabbi Nechemia. And you're telling me the Chachamim argue. I know this Chachamim argue. Why did Rabbi Yochanan not answer that? And now Rabbi Yossi HaKohen answered to Rabbi Abba HaKohen, says, I'll tell you why Rabbi Yochanan didn't answer that. Mishum da'omalei, because Rabbi Shlokish would then have responded back to Rabbi Yochanan, Shafkas Rabbanon v'avdus Reb Nechemya. That was my question. Why are you, Rabbi Yochanan, following Reb Nechemya and not the Tanakama of Reb Nechemya, especially when there's an explicit anonymous Mishnah like the Rabbanon of Reb Nechemya? You shouldn't be following Reb Nechemya. Okay, so Rabbi HaKohen said back to Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, fine, but Rabbi Yochanan could have still given even a different answer. All I told you was that that's what people were doing. You're telling me it's also they weren't allowed to do that. The people were following Reb Nechemya and they followed the Zman of Lekita. They shouldn't have followed Lekita, they should have followed Chanota. All I told you was what the people were doing. I didn't suggest the halacha was that way. So now Rabbi Yossi HaKohen answered back to Rabbi Abba HaKohen that the reason Rabbi Yochanan didn't say that to Rish Lakish is because the Amalei Rish Lakish would have answered back to Rabbi Yochanan, B'mokim Isura Kinagu Shavkinon Le. If indeed the halacha is not like Reb Nechemya, the people are doing like Reb Nechemya and you're just letting them, why not protesting? Why not stopping them? You can't just say that's what people did. You should have stopped them doing it and told them they're doing the wrong thing. That's why Rabbi Yochanan didn't answer that. Continues the Gemara with another attempt that Rabbi Abba HaKohen said to Rabbi Yossi HaKohen that why did Rabbi Yochanan not answer to Rish Lakish? Ki amin lecha ana. I just told you, Meiser is talking about Meiser Charuvim, and we were talking about Meiser, and we know that Meiser is only midrabanon. The only time that there's Meiser min HaTorah is by Tvua and by the grapes and the olives. Here we're talking about the carobs. We're talking about the Charuvim. And I said, Noagu ha'om b'charuvim, regarding charuvim, which is Meiser d'Rabbanon, they followed Reb Nechemya and they followed Lekita. Okay, that honestly shvius d'oraisa, and you're asking me a question from a Mishnah that says by Shmita, where Shmita is d'oraisa, for all fruits. So over there, it could be that in Min HaTorah, there's, even though the fact that it's Min HaTorah is not necessarily a reason you should follow Chanota and not Lekita, but you're asking me from a Mishnah that's talking about Shmita min HaTorah, and you're refuting me when I told you they were following Reb Nechemya regarding Meiser d'Rabbanon. That's not such a big question. Rabbi Yochanan should have answered that to Rish Lakish. Elo Omer Rabbi Abba HaKohen. Rabbi Abba HaKohen says this doesn't make sense. Rabbi Yochanan just remained silent and didn't answer. I wonder if that's the case. Timehani im hishiva Rish Lakish l'tshuvazu. I wonder if Rish Lakish actually asked Rabbi Yochanan this question. Did this ever transpire? Why did Rabbi Yochanan not answer this? Says the Gemara, im hishiva? Ha'isva, you're asking, could it be that did Rish Lakish ask the question to Rabbi Yochanan? Ha'isva, we know he asked the question. Maybe we were there, we heard the question. We know Rish Lakish asked the question and Rabbi Yochanan didn't answer. Eloima, what Rabbi Abba HaKohen meant to say is, Tumihani, I wonder, im kiblo Rabbi Yochanan, im loy kiblo. You're saying that he was being silent. I wonder if his being silent is because he agreed with the Rish Lakish's question, and indeed one shouldn't follow Reb Nechemya, or whether he just didn't answer, but really he had a very good answer. As we suggested, don't ask me a question from Shmita min HaTorah, which the halacha could well be that we follow Chanota to a custom that they followed Reb Nechemya by Meiser, which is only the Rabbanon. And in Yitzchok Hashem, in the next year, we're going to continue the next Mishnah.